Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm one of the Children's Occupational Therapists at the Royal Berkshire Hospital. We're going to spend some time exploring the senses in relation to the feeding experience and how this may impact on the types of food that your child is willing to eat and their experience at mealtimes. We will also talk about some strategies that you can use to help your child. So it's natural and healthy for us all to be tentative when we are faced with new foods, and for babies and children this is no different. We know that many toddlers will go through a stage of losing interest in food, which most will grow out of, but occasionally there may be other reasons contributing to this, and one of which could be your child's response to the sensory information they experience around foods. During the day, we take in a variety of information through our senses, and the experience of feeding is included in this. Okay, so let's introduce the senses that we will be talking about today in relation to the feeding experience. So we have movement, touch, visual, sound, taste and smell. These are all senses that we may experience when we are eating. And if we're sensitive to how food looks or how it feels in our hands and mouth, then this may lead us to avoid eating certain foods and be selective about the types of food that we will eat. This can be worrying as a parent, and hopefully we can help you to understand some of what might be happening with your child and give you some tools to help you introduce new foods and make mealtimes easier. Okay, so we're going to start at looking at movement. So what might you see? So we all fidget, and movement is really important for brain development. However, you might notice that when your child is seated at the dinner table, they may fidget more often, or maybe they're not able to sit for very long and constantly get up and down from the table. Some children will find it difficult to keep a good sitting balance, or their posture might be slumped, or they may lean on the table for support. And this might be because they don't have the muscle strength to keep their posture upright. So what can you do to help? So it's really important that you ensure that your child's feet are supported on a stable surface, such as on the floor or on a step. If your child finds it challenging to keep good balance on a normal sized adult dining chair and their feet are unable to touch the ground, we would recommend you add a step for them to put their feet on, or look at alternatives such as multi-height chairs, which can often be adjusted up until the age of 10. If your child has good balance and posture but seems to fidget and move at the table, wobble cushions can be really helpful in providing them with some movement while they're sat down. But we wouldn't recommend that you would use these for children that have difficulty keeping themselves upright, however. It can also be helpful to carry out a movement activity with children that are very fidgety and like to move, and you can do this before they sit at the dining table. Some examples that you could use at home are jumping on the spot or marching. You might try wall push-ups, or maybe try some animal walks. And you can do these for 2 or 3 minutes before you expect them to sit down at the table. Okay, so next we're going to think about touch, and this relates to how food might feel on your hands or in your mouth. Maybe your child has difficulty moving on from smooth purees or lumpy foods, gagging or spitting at any lumps that they might find. Or it may be that your child has always seemed to have a preference for dry, crunchy foods and refuses to eat any wet foods. You may have a child who is very sensitive to the feel of foods and refuses to touch it with their hands. Or they may dislike the feel of foods in their mouths, finding certain textures overwhelming or even describing it as being painful. Some children will experience the opposite and appear to be under-responsive to touch. For example, they might not be able to feel the food around or in their mouths, which can result in them overfilling. You may have noticed that your child prefers certain temperatures of food and drinks, for example, only taking drinks if they're cold or eating their food at a lukewarm temperature. Okay, so what can you do to help? So if your child tends to put too much in their mouth at once, try placing just a few pieces of food on their plate at one time, and then just add more once they've eaten those. For children that are very sensitive to the touch and the feel of foods, touching food, getting messy and encouraging your child to take part in messy play activities is a really important part of their development. It provides them with exciting tactile and sensory experience, which helps them to understand their senses. Crunching and squeezing foods in their hand is a great way, away from mealtimes, to become familiar with the feel of foods with no expectation of eating it. If your child can't tolerate the feel of food on their hands, try using utensils instead to touch the foods. Okay, we're going to talk a bit about messy play. Messy play is really important part of this, getting used to the feel and the touch of foods. Allow them to get messy. As a parent, you might have found this difficult, but messy play is important for your child, and mess is okay. So we're going to just give some ideas of how to introduce messy play. Okay, so we might want to start with some sort of dry, non-sticky textures. Things like dried rice, dried pasta, sand. And once your child is comfortable with those dry textures, then we suggest that you move on to the next stage, which would look at touching damp textures, things like damp sand, water play, Play-Doh, maybe playing with cooked rice or cooked pasta, mashed potato even. Bubbles is a really fun way to just get used to different textures on the hand and on the skin. Once your child is happy with those textures, then we would suggest you move on to the wet, sticky textures, colourful textures. Corn flour and water is really good fun. Get them involved with cooking with you, make some bread dough, biscuit mixture, and encourage them to use their hands to help you mix. Play with baked beans, maybe do some finger painting or hand painting. Shaving foam, maybe you could hide some toys in there, drive some cars through for them to find and have fun that way. Do some arts and crafts, sticking with non-toxic glue, maybe even make some slime together just to get them used to those different textures and have fun whilst doing it. If you've noticed that your child quickly wants to wipe their hands, what we would suggest is that you don't suggest that your child needs to wipe or wash their hands. Obviously, if they become upset or distressed, then provide them with tissues or wipes to clean, and encourage your child to wipe their hands independently if they're able to. Also, you can show them how to rub their hands together to make the mess go away that way. Allowing your child to have different textures on their hands just helps them become comfortable with having the mess on their hands. Right, so moving on to the visual aspect of food, thinking about what you might see for a child that struggles with this. They might struggle when the food is not the same shape. Maybe they become upset if their toast isn't the same colour. Maybe it's a bit darker brown, or maybe their potato chip has got a black mark on it. They might be upset if their biscuits are broken in half. Children can also be quite sensitive to packaging and know that the food item is not the same brand that they normally have. Okay, so what can you do to help? So using familiar foods, try and slightly change the features in front of your child. So if you're having some toast, maybe get some cookie cutters out and cut the toast into shapes in front of them so they can see you do it. You could slice foods in a different way to how you might normally do it. You can also vary foods, working on the similar foods that they like. So if they like potato waffles, offer them potato smileys. If they like chicken nuggets, try and offer them baked chicken. You can also put foods into unmarked containers and dispose of packaging as soon as possible after purchase if they are sensitive to brands of foods and are aware when you've changed foods. Okay, so next we're going to think about sound. You might have a child who is very sensitive to loud noises. Maybe they dislike the sound of others eating and chewing. You might also have a child who is easily distracted in busy environments or feels anxious when the environment is too loud. And this might impact on how relaxed they are or make it difficult for them to concentrate on eating. So what can you do to help? So depending on the age of your child and whether or not they would tolerate using them, ear defenders can sometimes be useful in dampening down loud noises, but these should only be used when the noise cannot be tolerated and removed after this and not worn all the time. Sometimes listening to background music can be helpful to provide a distraction so that your child is not focusing on the sound of the foods and eating. You might also find it helpful to allow your child to eat in quieter areas. For example, if you're eating out, choose a quieter area of the restaurant. And if your child is in nursery or school, it might be that going into the dining hall first, or maybe they prefer to eat in the classroom with a buddy. The last sensory systems we're going to talk about are taste and smell. So we've put these two sensory systems together as they're very closely interlinked. So firstly, thinking about taste, maybe your child has a preference for very strong or spicy or sweet flavours. Maybe they cover everything in their favourite sauce so that it all tastes the same. It might be that they only like bland foods, such as plain pasta or plain rice. Some children can be very sensitive to the smell of foods, and they can be put off by strong smells, which might cause them to gag, feel like they're going to vomit, or they might just complain very strongly about it. So what can you do to help? So we'd encourage you away from mealtimes with your child to explore different flavours, and just start with exploring on the fingers or on their lips. This is a very gradual process before your child will accept the foods into their mouth, and can be a very long process also. But licking foods and having them on the lips is a great way to try new foods without actually needing to take a bite. You could try using different sauces to change flavours. This could be done gradually, and you might just want to start by trying with dipping their favourite foods into new sauces. When trying new foods, we'd suggest that you have a safe plate or a napkin, which your child knows that they can spit the food into if they don't want to swallow it. In the next section, we will explore in more detail about how we can introduce new foods. We're going to spend some time thinking about how we can introduce new foods. So when looking at introducing new foods, there are a number of steps that need to be achieved before you would expect your child to get to the end target of eating. So first, they need to be happy looking at the food. And once they're happy with this, then we can look at moving on to touch. And initially, this might just be poking with one finger, but make sure you give them praise for what might seem like a very small step. Once they're comfortable with this, progress onto smelling or licking the food. And then the final steps would be taking bites and then eating and swallowing the food. So when you're going through this process, try and copy what your child does with the food and then model something back to them a little bit harder. So for example, if they poke it with one finger, maybe you could squash it with your hand. If they look upset with this, then just take a step back and go back to poking it again, taking it back to the easiest step that they were happy with and able to tolerate. But just remember, be positive about very small steps, reward them with high fives, say good job, and even if they don't manage to touch it or try anything, always be positive. It might just be you say, nice try, well done, we can try again another time. So as you might be understanding, this is a very gradual process which helps your child to become desensitized to the smell, the look and the feel of unfamiliar foods. So your goal should really be around your child being happy to play with and explore the new foods with no pressure to eat it. We would suggest that you offer the new foods on a daily basis to help your child desensitize to it. Each step for introducing foods will likely need to be spread out over a few days or even weeks, as they're unlikely to go through all the steps at the same time, but it will vary between foods. And just remember, it can take at least 20 times being exposed to a new food before your child is able to decide whether or not they like it. So don't be put off if they don't like the food to start with. Okay, so when is the best time to do this? So we would suggest that it's best to introduce new foods away from meal times, and it's really important to make it fun. Use positive words when talking about foods, as your child will pick up on any negative language. And just be aware of your own reactions to foods. So if you don't like a food, try not to show that to them. And if they reject the food, try not to react negatively. Just keep calm and keep the experience calm and relaxed for them. So we would suggest that you offer one new food at a time and try to offer new foods that are similar to the foods that they already like, as you're more likely to have success with this. So for example, if your child likes bread rolls, offer bagels, and you might follow this with croissants. If they like chicken nuggets, will they eat baked chicken? Or is it a certain brand pizza that they like? Will they try a different brand? Changes must be kept very small and make changes slowly, remembering that keeping calm if your child dislikes a food is very important. If your child is old enough to help decide, offer them a choice out of 2 foods that they would like to explore. At meal times, continue to offer the foods that they like. We call these their safe foods, and we would really encourage you not to try and hide any other foods in their safe foods, as they are really likely to notice any even small changes. It's really important that your child trusts you with the foods, otherwise they may limit their diet even further. We'd suggest that you avoid branded packaging and put foods into clear containers or boxes so that your child doesn't become dependent on eating a specific brand. And really, it's really important to think about having meals together as a family, where you can role model yourself exploring foods in various ways to demonstrate healthy food behaviours to your child and encourage them to do the same. Try also looking at pictures of foods in books and magazines. You can look at recipes together, choose things that you might want to cook, and this all helps your child increase their exposure to different types of foods. You might find that your child is more willing to try foods outside of the home, maybe in the car or on the train, maybe when you're going to the park. You can also try having indoor picnics in a different room to where you might normally have sit down for meals. And you might also find that they will try different foods at the grandparents' house or when they're at nursery. So to summarise, here are our 5 top tips for successfully introducing new foods. Number 1, be relaxed, be positive and make food fun. Number 2, feeding can be a messy business, so embrace the mess and just enjoy it. Number 3, keep safe foods safe. Try not to add or try and hide other foods into your child's safe foods because they will know. Number 4, don't give up. We know this can sometimes be a long process, but just keep going. And number 5, consistency. It's really important that you take the same approach and don't give up. So we hope that was helpful for you. There's also a printable guide for you to use which outlines some of the advice that we've given to you in this video.